So hi guys, we're all into our Bitmojis, so you may see some of these floating about as we go along. But yeah, I'm Kevin Gannon. I'm a solutions architect in the Belfast Blockchain Lab in PwC Belfast.
Yep. I'm Nadine. I'm a senior software engineer. So I've joined the PwC team to work on blockchain for the last year and a half or so. Before that, worked in Liberty in Belfast.
So we're kind of juggling this mic that's going all over the place, so hopefully you can all hear us anyway. So we're really kind of, we have various conversations with our clients around blockchain. What is this madness and what does it mean for us? Out of our Belfast lab, we typically kind of build a bunch of POCs for our clients, based on different technology stacks, which hopefully you'll learn a bit about today. And so we'll have a bit of a whistle-stop tour of why blockchain, how blockchain, what blockchain, some of the underlying tech stacks that we kind of dabble with, and what else you guys could be doing to get into the space as well. So let's over to Nadine.
So our team in PwC, we always like to start with the why, like Simon Sinek. So we'll go with why blockchain. As our world becomes increasingly digital and distributed, we need technology that can scale while providing the necessary security, trust, and accountability. And we think blockchain is that solution. It can establish trust between people, organizations, or machines without the need for intermediaries and enable value exchange. For the right use case, blockchain is a tool that can reduce cost and complexity, reduce errors, provide security, auditability, and resilience, and create shared, trusted transactions. To understand how, we look at what blockchain is. Blockchain is a ledger shared wherein additions are agreed upon by the majority. So simply put, it's a way of storing and sharing data among all participants in a network who each validate and hold an up-to-date copy of transactions. This provides transparency of exchanges, which are still secure and permissioned. The distribution of the ledger and the consensus prevents tampering, so the data is non-reputable as it is verified by all the participants. So this is how that looks in action. When two people want to exchange, in this case Alice wants to send money to Betty, the transaction is represented online in a block. This is broadcast to every party on the network, where whatever consensus is reached, so those in the network approve the transaction as valid. The transaction is added to a blockchain, and this is a reversible record of transactions that each party holds, enabling Betty to receive her money from Alice. So Kevin will now talk about how to determine if blockchain is a suitable solution for certain use cases.
Yeah, cheers. And just to go back to that, whenever anybody asks for a blockchain, I always say you can have a green one. Everybody says, can I have a mauve one? Can I have whatever? But green's my favorite color, so hopefully you'll see a lot of green today as well. Rationale for blockchain, we kind of have these kind of core tenets as to, like I said, can I get a green blockchain? No. What about the tech stack that I actually want to be able to use this solution for? So we kind of have these to kind of keep ourselves honest around, can I slap a blockchain on this? Can I slap a blockchain on that? Yes, you probably could, but equally, should you? You have to think about the shoulds as well. So we typically look to the likes of these, and if the majority of these are kind of, ticked in terms of meeting your criteria, then yes, we would say that blockchain is a viable option in terms of evaluating a tech stack for whatever you're actually trying to solve. So we've really got the likes of multiple parties sharing data, inserting data and updating data as well. So, it's a whole multiple party ecosystem play as well. So if you are talking about, internal to your company, can I just have a blockchain that will just record transactions and people can see stuff? Yes, you absolutely can, but it doesn't really give you that much value until you're actually looking to share that data and make that data actually meaningful for any of the other stakeholders that you might have as part of your process. And we'll talk about some of those potential use cases a bit later on as well. Requirement for verification, so you've got the likes of your consensus mechanisms. Amit was talking about earlier today around the 51% attack and how you can safeguard around how you actually run your network, how people can actually connect to your blockchain nodes as peers, and how you would actually mitigate fraudulent transactions. So the need for approval along the way in terms of transaction consensus. Intermediaries adding complexity. So do you have multiple parties? Is there a lot of manual stuff that's going on in your process? Could we alleviate some of that? Excuse me, by moving some of your process into more of an automated fashion where you might have the likes of smart contracts that can mitigate approvals and move your process through its flow without necessarily without necessarily having a lot of intermediaries validating those things for you. So potentially you could be cutting out some of that those interactions and hence save yourself some money as well. Interactions are time sensitive. Doesn't matter if all of this stuff is really manual. Is there a need for stuff to be really quick? Obviously, there's issues with the likes of blockchain and scalability and transactions per second, I guess, at the minute. We would say that certainly, the industry and the ecosystem in general is kind of coming together to fix a lot of that kind of stuff. So the likes of Bitcoin isn't necessarily going to be the fastest way for you to settle your trades, but using the likes of Monero or other kind of platforms that are out there that are screaming higher transactions per second. The likes of Hashgraph, for instance, are kind of saying interplanetary scale transactions available on their platform and things like that. Transactions interact. So again, is there a need for, in the case of supply chain management, that one stakeholder has to say something and approve something before something else can happen? Are there dependencies on those things that can be brought together to manage that whole process? So again, that's something that we would look at in terms of interdependency between your transactions that you're actually storing on your ledger with your actual workflow that you're actually trying to mitigate with as well. So, use case examples. Okay, so we really kind of look at these things, types of use cases and evaluate them through these different types of lenses. So you've got digital currencies, the likes of Bitcoin, which everybody should know and love and have a wee sticker on their badge if they want to talk about later on. Obviously, there's the kind of volatility behind the prices and whether or not people are using it for trading purposes versus actually looking to use Bitcoin to pay for things. Prior to PwC, we worked in a Bitcoin startup, really enabling online retailers to facilitate online payments with Bitcoin. But 4 or 5 years ago, the adoption really wasn't there and the uptake wasn't there. So a lot of the kind of consumer adoption and actually the want to use digital currencies on a day-to-day basis is still in its infancy, and hence why the volatility and people are just trading and stuff like that on different cryptocurrencies, I guess, as well. But yes, there's likes of Bitcoin, Ripple for interbank transactions and stuff like that. Ripple has their own payment rails for the likes of banks to communicate together, and obviously there's likes of Ether and fueling the public Ethereum network as well. Moving on to digital assets, really kind of representing a thing, a something, potentially a physical asset as well, digitally, where you could create a digital asset that you want to be able to track and trace and see where it is in its life cycle or prove its authenticity. So the likes of, in the case of loyalty, Rakuten, who acquired the startup that we left, have recently announced a push into the loyalty space where they're actually trying to move a lot of their kind of loyalty schemes onto a blockchain to mitigate cross-border use of their actual services that you can cash in your loyalty points for. So again, they're kind of looking to that type of stuff. The likes of Provenance, again, ArcNet here in Belfast are using the likes of supply chain food management as a means to kind of track and trace the authenticity of food from source to shelves and things like that. So there's a lot of things that you can look at in terms of actually digital assets and being able to kind of track them through potentially the likes of a supply chain. Moving on to identity. So again, between banks and customers, know your customer, AML, anti-money laundering and things like that. People want to be able to stand over the data that they've said. If they've approved you for certain services, the likes of blockchain could manage your identity in terms of, I have been KYC'd over here. Can I use that in potentially another bank or another process or something else as well? In the likes of passports, again, sovereign identity is becoming a big thing. There's the ID 2020 conference, which happens every year on the back of UN initiatives to try and get digital identity or rational legal identity for all by the likes of 2030, I think it is. So again, in the cases of refugees having to flee countries and be able to be represented and have financial inclusion in the country that they end up residing in, how do they bring their passport, how do they bring their identity with them or prove indeed that they are kind of, I'm a solutions architect or I'm a lawyer or whatever in the country that you end up whenever you've had to flee and leave all of your documents behind. So there's definitely a rationale behind credentials management and verification of your identity and your actual your resume, I guess, as well. Medical records, again, health records is starting to become a big thing. You know, again, everybody's kind of been thinking around the likes of financial services and trading platforms and exchanges, and how do I intermediate, you know, clearing houses, and can I get all that kind of stuff. But, you know, there's different industries that are obviously looking at these types of things as well. In the case of healthcare, you know, can I digitize my medical record and, you know, take ownership of my own data? You know, if I were in an accident and the ambulance was able to kind of scan my mythical QR code of my identity, could they see that I am O positive? And whenever, you know, feed that information to the hospital by the time I needed to actually go and get my blood transfusion or whatever I actually need. Or indeed is the data, and again, connected things, IoT is all kind of coming to the fore, all these emerging technologies to try and bring the likes of, you know, a more consolidated user experience for any of these services. And then I guess smart contracts. So this is a bit of a catch-all. You know, people have been talking about digitizing their processes and workflows. And what can I do with blockchain? You know, can I write a smart contract that takes ownership of my loan management schemes? You know, can people create a loan and manage a loan as a digital asset, I guess, within a bank? So the likes of smart contracts, you know, can be used probably in all three of the other lenses. But it's more, you know, in these instances, I guess it's more to do with transfer of ownership, management of process, tracking of approvals and things like that within organizations. And we have seen a lot of uptake in different industries who are looking to actually do that kind of thing as well. So moving on to actual industry, and to kind of go through some use cases, I guess, that we've been looking into, some that our clients have been looking to kind of evaluate and build proof of concepts with as well. It's clearly a non-exhaustive list, but you know, again, we've talked about identity and how do you actually verify your degree. You know, if I go to another country and I don't have my paper stuff, do I need to do that? You know, do I need to go and grab the piece of paper that, or the card, the certificate that my mum and dad keep on the wall for my actual degree in order to bring in to validate that I have or can I show something in a digital wallet instead? The likes of utilities and energy, there's been a lot of uptake around that. Can I track and trace energy usage? And indeed, you know, there's some energy providers that are looking to trade on the likes of those things as well. You know, the National Grid in the UK as well. The likes of smart grids, again, Amit talked about, you know, an initiative out of New York where they have a microgrid around blockchain solution for any kind of solar panels. So they're kind of, you know, they're using solar panels to build up their own energy kind of pools and then sell that or trade that with their neighbours, or indeed sell it back to the energy grid as well. So, you know, how do you kind of peer-to-peer lending of energy within your kind of community? So again, community-based, ecosystem-based type use cases as well. The likes of farm and healthcare we've talked a bit about as well, around, you know, proof of provenance of, you know, not just, you know, horse meat like we were talking about in Amit's use case earlier on, but indeed drugs and, you know, things that are FDA approved, or is there a decentralized place that I can look up, you know, where is this drug currently in transit? Is it in my GP where I can go and get it? What if there's a problem with certain things? Can the World Health Organization track what ingredients are in certain drugs to see, can these things be brought out of circulation if problems have arisen, or certain research papers have indicated that, you know, using this ingredient will increase uses of cancer or anything like that? You know, can you track and trace ingredients? Can you track and trace drugs? Or indeed, can I bring my digital wallet to kind of cash in my prescription at my local pharmacist as well? Stuff like that. Energy, we kind of talked about that as well. People have been doing a bunch of R&D around core samples and taking samples out of the ground, and, you know, how do we know that those samples haven't been tampered with? Much like clinical trials as well, you know, how do we know that the data that's being collected, you know, is tamper-proof? Nobody's been able to kind of fudge those records and stuff as well. And again, it's the wider ecosystem play there as well, around if one organization is in control of the whole data, like Facebook, and selling stuff to other people in order to kind of, you know, push on their ads or whatever. By having multiple people in play, you can actually see, you know, are people trying to tamper with this data? Has anybody done that? So, you know, a bunch of stuff that's going on, and, you know, it's pretty innovative stuff. Some of it may well be gimmicky. You know, I think, you know, Amit earlier today was kind of saying how there's hundreds, if not thousands, of different use cases and stuff. They probably all boil down to certain types of use cases implemented across different industries. But certainly, you know, it is quite an interesting space, and I think a lot of our clients are certainly interested in how it disrupts them. All right, and we're halfway through. Excellent. So, back to Nadine.
So as Kevin has just talked about the vast number of use cases, there's also a vast number of technology stacks that support blockchain or distributed ledger technologies. This is just a small sample. As we've mentioned, we've been working on some POCs within PwC that uses a few of these. So our intention now is to go through 4 of these with a common set of criteria that we use to evaluate their suitability for different use cases and POCs that we're doing, and just some information that we find through our use of these. So first up is multi-chain.
Oh, that's me. Okay. Right. Okay. So multi-chain. So these are really, a series of open source blockchain tech stacks that are typically fairly general purpose, that you can build out your own technology stacks on top of. You can implement your own use cases. You can write smart contracts if need be. Multi-chain is not one of those. At present, they currently have a bit of a hard line on the necessity for smart contracts and whether or not you actually need them. The likes of their CEO, Gideon Greenspan, is a big fan of blogging around how you don't actually, he hasn't come across an actual use case that he wouldn't have been able to do, using multi-chain and then layering in other things. So we'll get on to smart contracts, and I guess in the next side of things, but it's really, this is around, the actual transactions and the data that you want to have stored in there. If you want to be able to do other things on top of that, they would argue that you can do all of that outside of the use of smart contracts and build it into your API business logic layer instead. But again, we find it to be very successful in terms of a series of POCs that we've been able to build out. The various data points that are there, they support streaming. In terms of permissions, you can have various different types of nodes, whether or not you're an issuer, somebody who can actually create new data, whether or not you can only read stuff. So again, we'll kind of tap into the different types of stacks that are out there as to whether or not some of them are supported or not. Custom events, again, it's always handy to be able to fire events and stuff like that. They currently don't have something like that, although they do have a pretty progressive roadmap as well around what they want to be able to do. The likes of the smart contracts, for instance, while they don't really believe in the use of them, they have started to introduce the concept of transaction filters, which you can apply to the various transactions that you have. So in theory, you could put some sort of approvals into whether or not those transactions should end up forming part of a block or not. So this is a bit of them kind of tipping their hat to people like the idea of smart contracts. And indeed, we've had numerous examples with clients where they want to use a smart contract technology, in which case it's kind of said, right, well then we can't use multi-chain, but it's perfect for your actual use case. So again, it's, I don't know, I guess it's just an industry thing where people see smart contracts as blockchain 2.0, and if you're not using that or don't have the capability to use that, are you going to be left behind whenever other innovations come along in the space as well? So strengths, like I say, it was forked from the Bitcoin code base. So in theory, it's never been hacked. Again, there could be a lot of kind of DDoS attacks and stuff on it. They would argue that it's largely for private blockchains and use cases like that, largely for asset-based digital asset management stuff, which again we've kind of put down as a weakness. But as a general purpose stack, you would hope to be able to do other things with it as well, and we'll kind of touch on some of the other things that we are able to do with some of the other tech stacks too. But I have to, certainly our developers are a big fan of that. I haven't used it as much as some of the other guys, but they're obviously quite keen on it. I'll be talking a bit later about one of the ones that I am a fan of. So I'll leave multi-chain there and move on to something else. Just to kind of touch on some of the environmentals, it is kind of based on assets. Supply chain management, again, is obviously a very strong use case for the likes of this. If you have a digital asset or an asset that you can track digitally, then this is a good platform for the likes of that. As you can see, typical kind of Bitcoin transaction-esque mechanisms where all of the transactions reach all of the different nodes. So you can actually see all of that. Again, that is an important nuance. People are kind of talking about blockchain versus digital ledger technology and what are the kind of nuances between them. Typically, one of the big ones that people latch onto is whether or not, if a transaction doesn't hit all of the nodes, is it actually a blockchain, or are you actually just fudging data or whatever? So there are kind of, again, nuances around distributed ledgers versus the actual blockchain itself, whether or not you actually have a chain of blocks that everybody can download and see what's going on. Okay. Hyperledger. Okay.
So Hyperledger was established in 2015. It's an IBM incubation project. They currently offer a few different stacks, but we'll focus on Fabric. Fabric is fully permissioned through MSPs. So it has a default one, which is Fabric CA, so it handles the cryptographic mechanisms for your cert authorization for users. Then the confidential transactions, anything within Fabric is encrypted, but it also has an additional layer of channels. So while a blockchain would be distributed to every peer in a network, you can sub-channel the network within Fabric. So every channel has its own ledger, and all the peers, all the participants of that channel get a copy of that ledger. So it's mini blockchains in one big network. Custom events are supported. You can use a big blob of data. So one advantage we find with Fabric is there's less limitation on the size of data that's transmitted on the chain itself, and the format is, because it's a blob, JSON blob, you're able to use different data types more freely than some of the other stacks as well. The consensus is pluggable. There's no ops or PBFT, and the chain code itself, so that smart contract that it has, was written in Go primarily as a supported language, but it's now expanding its library to include Java and Node.js. So it's one that offers the most advanced languages for actually developing the smart contracts within the blockchain. As I've mentioned, because it offers different versions and different tools, it's not the most stable. It's still evolving. The latest edition of Fabric has these channels and the additional libraries. It's something that's ever evolving and growing. But a sample network here shows one channel that you can interact with that has two peers. As you see, every channel also has the ordering service. This handles the blocks, receives any transaction from a peer, orders it into the blockchain, and distributes that to the peers within the channel. You can also see there each one has its own CA, so you can have multiple membership service providers within the channel that handle your different organizations. And you can also hopefully see that each peer has the chain code as well. And to look at the chain code in a bit more detail, the way that you would use the Fabric chain code is there's four main aspects to it. Your structures, as I've mentioned, because you can use any data structure, you can define something that's like JSON that is able to be defined in tables. Fabric also uses LevelDB and CouchDB as its main data stores. So the LevelDB offers your basic key value per queries, whereas CouchDB enables more complex queries, rich data queries that work well with these kind of object structures. So I don't have an example of the main in it, but that's just how you set up and get the chain code running. But the key function then is there is one entry point, one invoke that you will call with different function types, and you're able to control your what the function is and go off and do whatever interaction with the chain code that you like.
Yep. Okay, so Ethereum. So this probably is my favorite at the minute. Which again, it's quite contentious because I think Ethereum it's probably got the most. Well, yeah, it does. That's the largest kind of developer community at the minute, where it's been developing over the past series of years. It leans very heavily on Solidity, which is a brand new programming language that they've kind of created specifically to run on the likes of the Ethereum network. Although I know the likes of Hyperledger, some of the Hyperledger incubation projects are looking to be able to port the likes of Solidity into some of the other Hyperledger fabrics as well, so that you can, like if you were to write something in, that you had planned on running in Ethereum, you could port your smart contract code over to something else as well. So again, innovations in the space and stuff like that. But Solidity is very, very new. If anybody's been kind of following some of the stuff over the past couple of years, that they had the whole DAO problem, where they had this kind of decentralized autonomous organization, I think it stands for, that'll do, where people were able to kind of, plow in a whole bunch of money to be used and dispersed by the network. However, the kind of the nuances in the code and how raw the actual code was opened up a lot of potential for people to legitimately write transactions that effectively drained that money. So like hundreds of millions of dollars kind of went down the pipes whenever things like that happened. And then they had to have a very tricky conversation as to whether or not they wanted to roll back the public Ethereum network in order to facilitate, getting people their money back, or do they suck it up and say, well, actually, that's, it is an experiment, and you probably shouldn't have put hundreds of millions of dollars in there. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. I quite like it because it does give you something new to kind of to tap into. The blockchain itself, using the likes of Geth and Web3 in order as libraries to interact with your actual code. I guess, to kind of talk about smart contracts, and again, Amit, talked about it earlier this morning. It's really executable code that runs as part of your transactions on your actual network. So it's not just like Bitcoin where you're sending money from A to B. You actually have executable code that's kind of interacting with, digital assets, I guess, if you've created your smart contracts like that, so that you can actually facilitate on the public network or indeed on the private network, running your actual blockchain solution. And again, it's quite an important point. People have been kind of a bit worried about running stuff in the public networks. You can, take this offline or internal in order to run things internally, and then maybe expose it over APIs if you want publicly moving forward. So yeah, it's quite an interesting one, and I think a lot of the kind of the proofs of concepts and internal projects that I've been working on, I've been using Ethereum for those. They kind of tap into what you can do. Again, the language itself is quite raw. It doesn't really support object types. It's got structs, which is kind of the closest thing that you have. But a lot of the kind of internal like gets and sets and stuff like that there, you have to kind of manage building those out for yourself at the minute. As you can see, you can build in access through your dApps to the likes of IPFS, which is a decentralized kind of database of data repositories. If you want to be able to store documents on the likes of a blockchain, IPFS is a decentralized version of that. And just to kind of show that's, as of certainly last night, that was the state of the public Ethereum network. fstats.net, I think it is. People have built a whole bunch of kind of open source libraries that you can actually interact with the public network, or indeed you could point this at your private chain as well in order to facilitate seeing what's going on, who's mining, and what kind of peers do I have. All right.
So Corda is one of the distributed ledger technology stacks. It's not a full blockchain. It takes some of the principles, but it wouldn't share the data with every participant in its network. It's very focused on being a private transaction store. So it was came out in 2016. It was R3 consortium that is mainly focused with banks and financial institutions. So the network setup, it is private. It has a doorman in terms of access. Permissions are also able to be based on transaction level as well. It will use smart contracts, so core apps, distributed apps that run its code, which can be written in Kotlin or Java. And it would also then, one thing that makes it a bit different is it still relies on notaries and third parties. So rather than the direct exchange, it does include in its flow as part of the main checks that the notary takes care of the consensus validation outside of anything that's included in the contract, the smart contract transaction. And it can use oracles if there's any third party that has to verify or confirm any other data for any other participants. So this flow shows that any parties interacting, they create a transaction in which any parties involved are listed and have the contract code that they use, which is also supported by legal pros within the Corda struct. And then that will go to any needed notaries or oracles before it goes to the other party that's involved in the transaction. And each of those parties have their own vault, which stores the transactions on their ledger. They don't see transactions from every ledger in the network, just the ones they're directly involved in. So it's a bit more privatized than the other blockchain offerings that we mentioned.
Okay. Yes.
We just have the wrap-up times.
Yeah, okay, so conscious that we're running out of time. Thankfully, we only have a couple of slides left, and then you guys can run off and grab a beer. I know I will be. Just to kind of talk about around where the landscape is going and how the ecosystem is evolving. The likes of the Hyperledger Foundation has a whole host of projects that are involved, and Fabric was the main one that we've been kind of looking at, but the likes of Sawtooth has been very interesting. Whenever I was at the reInvent conference in Vegas last year, there's a whole bunch of Sawtooth projects that were kind of coming to the fore around healthcare and telecoms as well. So again, very interesting. They see themselves as higher transaction throughput for faster mechanisms, whereas Fabric would be a bit more industry standard, potentially a bit slower. And then you've got other innovations, the likes of Tron, and that's not the movie, unfortunately. where they are, it's just new incarnations of blockchain platforms that are coming to the fore. The likes of Cardano touts itself as blockchain 3.0, which is really kind of taking the likes of smart contracts and executable code to the next level, and trying to break out into some of the scalability issues and resiliency issues that have been reported over the past couple of years as well. Hashgraph I mentioned earlier in terms of their plan for interplanetary scale, TPS and all that kind of stuff. So what's the space for that? And then I guess it's just, if you guys want to learn any more, come chat to us. There's a whole bunch of guys at the booth. I mentioned the likes of ourselves, ArcNet, and Rack Labs as well, here in this space as well. So there's a bunch of stuff that's ramping up in Belfast, which is very, it's great to see a whole bunch of the kind of technology stacks there, and companies that are kind of coming to the fore. As always, online tutorials, Twitter, YouTube. Look at it all. Andreas Antonopoulos, he's a big guy in the Bitcoin space, and he loves kind of giving out a lot of his knowledge for free. So that's quite good. And then I guess go buy Bitcoin. And as a PwC employee, I'm not allowed to say that's really a proper thing that you should be able to do. But again, it's just kind of getting into the crypto space. It's very interesting. How do I set up a wallet? How do I go and actually transfer some of my fiat to something else? But obviously, this is not financial advice, and you're not going to make your millions out of that. There, people have already been doing that. But yes, I'm pretty sure we don't have time for questions. But again, we'll be available for the rest of the day if anybody wants to kind of have a chat around anything. And another wee Bitmoji.